The schoolteacher was too proud to plead, so she undid his belt and whispered, "Make me feel worthy." She had always believed that pride was both a shield and a language. From the first day she stood before a crooked little chalkboard in the village school, she had felt the steady hum of purpose under her ribs. The children in her charge were not just pupils. They were small, stubborn lights she had to keep lit. Their homes were thin, their clothes patched, their breakfasts often nothing more than a corner of stale bread. Still, when they learned to read, when they'd finally learn a sum, she saw something open inside them, a space that could hold dreams. She would not trade that sight for anything. Her name was Amina. She was 36, with hair the color of winter soil and hands that remembered the exact weight of a ruler. People in the town called her strict, which was partly true. She believed in rules because they taught consequences. They called her proud because she refused favors. She paid her rent with a teacher's modest wage and mended her own coats instead of accepting help. Pride, to Amina, meant living on her own terms. It meant telling her students that their worth was not a coin to be earned with bowing or begging. For years, the school stood on a narrow lane between a bakery and a locksmith's shop. The building leaned a little, the window panes rattled in winter, and the paint had long ago given up its fight against the weather. Still, inside those walls, Amina made worlds. She kept a small garden of books on a splintered shelf. She made maps from scrap paper and taught the children to fold stories the way sailors fold sails. She read aloud until the afternoon bell was only an idea. In return, the children would bring her small gifts, a tidy pile of river stones, a sprig of peppermint, a single pencil stub devotedly saved. Those gifts mattered more to her than any ribbon or praise from outsiders. Trouble began when the town hall announced budget cuts. The council had decided to trim public expenses, and the school was one of the items under consideration. The man who led the council, Mr. Hadley, was a tall man with a slow voice and a ledger that seemed to live in his hand. He had influence the way a wind has force, unseen but felt at every corner. People said he preferred grand projects, new streets, a market arch, things his name could be carved into. He did not like small, stubborn institutions that asked little and gave much. Yet the school gave him no satisfaction or statue. When the council threatened to close the school, Amina waited. She believed there were ways to change minds with petitions, with an honest showing of numbers and needs. She gathered the parents and the town's modest list of supporters. She counted the children and the months left in the budget. She wrote letters, each line steady and careful, explaining how a closed school would mean more children sent to unsafe labor, more girls kept home as unpaid help, more plain darkness in the minds of children who deserved light. She kept all of those letters in a drawer as if they were lanterns waiting to be lit. But the town council meetings grew colder. The ledger keepers liked the new financial reports. The money saved by combining classes and shuttering small buildings looked tidy and sensible on paper. The bakery owner worried about his own bills. The locksmith silently wished for fewer complaints. Community is often a kind of weather. It clears in clouds, and this winter it clouded. Faces that once nodded warmly at Amina now nodded with a practiced distance. A few parents afraid of losing their tiny wages asked the teacher to accept an offer from a nearby town where a single combined school might take their children in a cramped space. Amina listened. Inside, something small and fierce insisted against the creeping acceptance. She could not believe Mr. Hadley would let the school close without any real reason. She remembered him as a boy who once came into her classroom to measure the height of a blackboard while his father ran for council. He had asked questions then, polite and bright. That memory wanted to persuade her that a person could be reached. So she prepared for the meeting that mattered. She arranged a folder with examples of the children's work, with letters from families, with a list of the parents who would lose days of work if the school closed. She planned to speak plainly, with facts and the steady warmth she had always used when coaxing a child toward courage. When Amina arrived at the council hall that day, the winter light seemed to press down the street. The hall smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. Council members sat like statues along a long table. Mr. Hadley sat at the center, his face dim as a lantern at dusk. He listened with a politeness that could be a bluff. The meeting was orderly. Figures were read, voices were polite. Then it was her turn. She placed her folder gently on the table and spoke. She told them about the children who had walked 3 kilometers through rain to get to that room. She told them about a girl named Noor who had taught herself to read by candlelight because her father came home too tired to help. She read the letters out loud as if each line was a small bell. "My son counts the days until he can go to school," one parent had written. "If you close the school, where will he learn to read?" Another letter asked for a chance, not pity. Amina's words were plain, like the bread she sometimes shared with the children. Mr. Hadley listened. He shifted in his chair. His ledger lay open, a heavy book that could swallow whole pleas with a single page turn. When she finished, there was a silence that felt too thin, like glass. The council took the time to consult their numbers. The mayor's voice spoke of spreadsheets and efficiency. A man from the finance office spoke of consolidation and savings. One by one, the reasons to close the school came like carefully stacked bricks. It was then, when logic and numbers pressed forward, that Amina felt the old shield of pride begin to feel like a fragile shell. Her first instinct was to argue more furiously, to wave more proofs, to make every figure in her folder into a cartoon effort that could not be ignored. Pride had taught her to fight with reason, to keep her dignity while demanding justice. But something else stirred. The sight of children reading quietly at their desks, the way Noor's small face lit up at a new word. Those images were not arguments. They were a plea without artifice. If numbers had to do the persuading, so be it. But numbers were not enough. She had to show the council what the school meant in a way that even a ledger might feel. She had to give them a human shape to the sums. So she did what she had never done in public. She stood up from the table and stepped forward. Chairs scraped softly. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Amina moved to the center of the room, not with a booming voice or a theatrical gesture, but with a simple, steady step that pulled the eyes of the room like a string. She opened her hands and reached into her coat pocket, where she kept a folded scrap of drawing paper, a page Noor had made. A sun with a crooked smile and stick figures beneath, each hand holding a letter. She placed the paper on the table and looked up. "What you are about to do," she said, speaking directly to Mr. Hadley, "is more than closing a building. You would be closing a place where children learn how to be more than what their circumstances decide. You would be telling them that their futures can be trimmed to match a budget, that their hopes are negotiable." Her voice did not waver, but there was a trembling quiet underneath it. She could feel her throat tighten the way it did when she read the last lines of a story and did not yet want to let go. Pride told her to keep composed, to present charts and leave, but another word, softer, older, told her to make herself seen in a way that asked for respect rather than demanded it. She thought for a long minute about what it meant to ask for dignity. To treat someone as worthy was not always to demand a favor. It could be a quiet appeal for recognition. It could be an invitation to the other person to stand beside you rather than above. Amina remembered her mother's hands, the way they had taught her to sew and to fold clothes with care. Her mother had never bowed to anyone, but she taught Amina how to ask for what was needed without lowering herself. It was a small thing, but the movement in that room made it larger than it was. She folded the coat neatly and placed it on the table beside the drawing. She stepped forward until she was close enough that Mr. Hadley could see the lines at the corners of her eyes, the small freckle above her left eyebrow, the steady set of her jaw. She looked at him without anger or pleading. She had prepared for argument. Instead, she offered a human moment, simple, plain, honest. "I am not asking for charity," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I ask only that you see why this place matters. Make me feel that what I and these children do matters to this town." The words fell into the room in a new light. To say, "make me feel worthy," was not to ask him to kneel. It was to ask for recognition. It was to give him a chance to be more than a man of ledgers, to be someone who could understand the small scale of real lives. Amina did not know whether she had moved him. She only knew that she had done what she could. She had shown herself without armor, and she had asked in the simplest way she knew how. For a heartbeat, the room did not decide how to react. The mayor shuffled papers and looked at the ceiling. A councilman coughed lightly as if the air had grown thin. Mr. Hadley stared at the drawing, at the neat fold of the coat, and finally at Amina's face. His eyes, which had been measured and distant for so long, seemed to gather like rain. Something in him changed minutely. Perhaps a memory of a time when he himself had been small and been helped, perhaps a small shame about the cold cleanliness of his calculations. He cleared his throat, a soft unfurling of sound. "You have a way with words," he said at last, and then added more quietly, "and with children." It was not a decision yet. The council still had to vote. But the temperature in the room had altered. The meeting's momentum had been slowed by a human presence that charts could not easily move around. People began to speak in different tones. The locksmith spoke of the school's books and how his apprentice borrowed them. The baker told a quick story about a child who returned a loaf of bread because she had wanted him to have the first piece on his birthday. Small things that had once been insignificant now seemed to demand attention. When Amina left the hall that day, the winter light outside looked less heavy. Her coat hung over her arm, folded like a promise. She had not won yet. The battle with ledgers and council minutes was not finished, but she had done something she feared. She had come close enough to another person to ask for recognition without selling herself short. She had unfastened the armor of distance and whispered for dignity. That night when she walked home, the children from the lane followed her a little way, whispering their own small reassurances, clutching their books. She smiled at them and felt, with that peculiar teacher's certainty, that whatever happened next, she had given the town a chance to be better than its ledger. The days after the council meeting moved slowly, like a river thick with winter mud. Nothing was decided yet, and that uncertainty weighed on Amina more than a clear refusal would have. Each morning she unlocked the school door as she always had, swept the dust from the floor, and straightened the desks that leaned like tired shoulders. She smiled at the children when they arrived, stamping cold from their feet. But inside she carried the echo of that quiet room and the way Mr. Hadley's eyes had changed, just for a moment. The children sensed something was different. They were not told the school might close, but children have a sharp instinct for unspoken worries. Nor raised her hand more often than usual, as if holding on to the thread of attention might keep the world steady. Sammy, who usually fidgeted, sat very still, his pencil hovering over the page. Amina made the lessons gentler without softening them. She told stories about bridges and how they are built one stone at a time. She spoke of people who stood firm without shouting. She did not say why these lessons mattered, but she chose them with care. At night, Amina wrote. She wrote letters she might never send, shaping her thoughts so they would not harden into bitterness. She wrote lists of what could be done if the vote went against her, combining classes, finding a larger room, teaching in shifts. Pride had taught her to prepare for loss without collapse, but when she set her pen down, she allowed herself a single, honest breath of fear. It came and went, like a passing ache, and she did not give it more room than it deserved. Mr. Hadley, meanwhile, found that the ledger felt heavier than usual. He read through the budget again, tracing the neat lines with a finger that hesitated. Numbers still made sense, they always did. But something about the drawing Amina had placed on the table had unsettled him. He had taken it home without saying why, sliding it between the pages of his ledger. At his desk that night, the little sun with its crooked smile stared back at him as if it knew him. He remembered being young, measuring a blackboard, thinking that small rooms could hold big futures. He had forgotten that feeling somewhere along the way. The next council meeting arrived with a quiet crowd. People stood along the walls, hats in hand, eyes alert. No one raised their voice. The agenda moved forward. When the school came up, the room leaned in. Amina sat near the back this time, her hands folded, her face calm. She had spoken already. Now she would listen. Mr. Hadley cleared his throat and spoke more slowly than usual. He acknowledged the numbers, then paused. He spoke of responsibility, of careful spending. Then he said something unexpected. He spoke of outcomes that were harder to measure, of how education shaped towns not in a season, but in years, of how small schools sometimes did the most work with the least recognition. He did not promise anything. He asked for a delay, a chance to look again, to visit the school and see it with his own eyes. The mayor frowned, but nodded. A vote was postponed. After the meeting, word spread like a cautious hope. Parents stopped Amina on the lane to say thank you without touching her arm, as if they feared to break the fragile balance. The locksmith brought a new lock for the school door and installed it without asking for payment. The baker sent a basket of bread with a note that said only, "For the children." Amina accepted these gestures not as charity, but as signs that the town remembered itself. A week later, Mr. Hadley came to the school. He arrived without ceremony, his coat buttoned, his ledger tucked under his arm. The children stared at him as if he were a visitor from a different story. Amina greeted him simply and invited him in. She did not perform. She did not explain more than necessary. She taught as she always did. He watched as the children read aloud, stumbling and then finding their footing. He watched Amina kneel to explain a sum, her voice steady, her patience endless. He noticed the patched books, the careful way she handled them, the pride the children took in keeping them neat. He listened as Noor read a paragraph twice, the second time with a smile that surprised even her. Something in his chest loosened. During a break, Amina showed him the shelf of gifts, stones, drawings, folded notes. She did not name the givers. She did not turn the shelf into an argument. She let it be what it was, evidence of care. Mr. Hadley ran a finger along the edge of the shelf and said nothing. Outside, the winter sun moved across the yard, touching the chalk marks on the wall. When he left, he thanked her. It was a simple word, but it landed with weight. Amina watched him go and returned to her class without comment. That evening, she walked home through streets that felt less narrow. She knew the decision was still not made. but she also knew that something had shifted from abstraction to reality. The next days brought whispers and guesses. Some said the school would be spared. Others said the delay was only a polite ending. Amina refused to be drawn into speculation. She focused on the present, on the daily work that had always sustained her. She taught a lesson on fairness, asking the children what it meant. Their answers were plain and true. "It means everyone gets a chance," said Sammy. "It means you don't forget people," said Noor. Amina wrote those words on the board and felt steadier. The final meeting came on a gray afternoon. The hall was full again. The vote was taken after a brief discussion. The numbers were close. When the result was announced, it was not a grand victory or a complete loss. The school would remain open for the year, with conditions, shared resources, a review at the end of the term, a plan to show progress. It was a narrow bridge, not a wide road, but it was a bridge. Amina felt a quiet relief that did not bloom into celebration. She stood and thanked the council, her words measured. Mr. Hadley met her eyes and nodded. Outside, the crowd dispersed slowly. The future was still uncertain, but it was no longer closed. That night, Amina returned to the classroom alone. She stood by the window and looked at the empty desks. She thought about pride again. Not as armor, but as a spine that keeps you upright while you reach forward. She understood now that asking to be seen had not diminished her. It had sharpened her purpose. She folded the drawing carefully and placed it back on the shelf with the others, a small sun among many signs of care. The next morning, the children arrived early. They buzzed with rumors they half understood. Amina gathered them and spoke plainly. "We are still here," she said. "We will keep learning." The room exhaled. Lessons began. The day found its rhythm. As weeks passed, the school changed in small ways. Parents volunteered time. The locksmith taught a short workshop. The baker showed the children how to measure ingredients. The town began to use the school as a meeting place in the evenings. Progress did not come from a single decision, but from many small choices made together. Amina knew the review would come. She prepared for it with care, documenting growth, gathering stories, and steady numbers. She did not fear the meeting as she once had. She had learned that dignity could be both firm and open, that worth could be shown without being sold. And as she watched Noor read a new book with confidence, she felt certain of one thing. Whatever the final outcome, the bridge they had built would not disappear. It would carry them one careful step at a time toward a future they were learning to claim together. Spring arrived slowly, as if the season itself was unsure whether it was welcome. The mornings were still cold, but the light lingered longer in the afternoons, resting on the school's cracked windows like a gentle hand. Amina noticed how the children leaned toward that light as they worked, how their voices grew steadier when they read aloud. The school had been given time, and time, she knew, could be shaped if used well. The conditions set by the council were clear. Progress had to be shown, not just in test scores, but in attendance, community involvement, and careful use of resources. The review at the end of the term would decide the school's future. Some teachers might have felt watched or pressured. Amina felt focused. She turned the requirements into a quiet plan, one small step after another, so the work would not overwhelm her or the children. She began by keeping careful records, but she refused to let numbers rule the room. Each child had a simple folder with their work, notes on improvements, and small goals written in clear words. She involved the children in this process, letting them see how effort grew into skill. When Noor finished a book without stopping, Amina wrote it down and showed her the note. Noor held the paper as if it were a treasure. When Sammy managed to sit through a full lesson without losing focus, Amina nodded at him with a smile that said she had seen him. The community's presence grew in quiet ways. In the evenings, the school filled with soft sounds again. Parents came to learn basic reading skills so they could help their children. The locksmith brought old tools and showed the older students how to fix a loose hinge. The baker taught a lesson on measuring and patience, explaining how bread needed time as much as effort. These moments were not dramatic, but they stitched the school more firmly into the town's life. Mr. Hadley visited twice more, each time without announcement. He sat in the back and watched, his ledger closed. He spoke little, but he listened. He noticed how Amina handled setbacks, a broken window repaired with borrowed glass, a sick child whose lessons were sent home neatly folded. He noticed how the children helped one another, sharing pencils without being told. These were not items he could easily list, but they weighed on him all the same. Still, not everyone was pleased. A few council members grew impatient. They wanted faster results, clearer proof. One afternoon, a letter arrived asking Amina to submit an early report. The tone was polite, but firm. Amina read it twice, then folded it and placed it in her drawer. She did not rush to defend herself. She prepared instead. She gathered the folders, the attendance logs, the notes from parents. She wrote a summary in simple language, careful and honest. She did not hide challenges. She showed how they were being met. That same week, a small conflict arose that tested her resolve. Two older boys from different families argued in the yard, their voices sharp with something deeper than anger. It could have turned ugly, but Amina stepped between them and asked them to sit. She listened to both sides without judgment. She reminded them that the school was a place of safety and respect. Then she asked them to work together to fix a loose fence board as a consequence. They did so in silence at first, then with reluctant cooperation. By the end, the fence stood straight, and the boys walked back inside without looking at one another. It was a small victory, but Amina recorded it as carefully as any test result. At home, Amina felt the weight of the coming review more sharply. She lived simply, but the worry crept in during the quiet hours. She missed her mother most on nights like these. She remembered her voice, calm and firm, saying that worth did not come from winning every battle, but from standing honestly in each one. Amina held on to that thought when sleep came slowly. As the term moved toward its end, the children prepared a small presentation for the council, though no one had asked for it. It was their idea. They wanted to show what the school meant to them. Amina guided them gently, making sure it stayed simple and sincere. They chose readings, drawings, and a short explanation of what they had learned. Nora practiced her part quietly, her confidence growing like a steady flame. Sammy volunteered to help set up chairs, his movements careful and proud. The day of the review arrived with clear skies. The council members filed into the school, some curious, some guarded. Amina greeted them and stepped aside. This was not her moment to speak first. The children began. They read, they showed their work, they explained how the school helped them learn and feel safe. Their voices were not perfect, but they were real. The room softened. Mr. Hadley watched closely. When Nor finished reading and looked up, her eyes met his. He smiled without thinking. In that instant, he understood something he had long ignored. That leadership was not only about choosing the strongest path, but about protecting the fragile ones until they could stand on their own. After the presentation, the council asked questions. Amina answered plainly. She did not exaggerate or promise miracles. She spoke of steady growth, of shared effort, of responsibility carried together. She spoke of dignity, though she did not use the word. It lived in her posture, in her tone, in the way she spoke of the children as partners in learning, not as problems to be solved. When the council left, they did not announce a decision. They thanked the children and walked out into the sunlight. The waiting returned, but it felt different now. The school had shown itself. Whatever came next would be faced openly. Days passed. Lessons continued. The children returned to their routines, though a quiet excitement ran beneath their work. Amina kept teaching, kept planning, kept believing in the value of what they were doing. She had learned not to tie her sense of worth to an outcome she could not control. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. This one was heavier, sealed with care. Amina opened it slowly. The words were measured, official, but clear. The school would remain open permanently, with support for repairs and resources. The council cited community impact, student growth, and long-term value. Amina read the letter twice, then closed her eyes and breathed. Relief washed over her, followed by a calm pride that did not shout. She gathered the children and told them the news simply. For a moment there was silence as the words settled. Then smiles spread, cautious at first, then wide. Nor hugged her book to her chest. Sammy laughed out loud and clapped a hand over his mouth, surprised by his own joy. Amina let the moment unfold without control. It belonged to them. That evening, the town gathered at the school. There was no grand celebration, just shared food and quiet conversation. Mr. Hadley attended and spoke briefly. He admitted that he had learned something important, that the school had reminded him why service mattered. He thanked Amina publicly, and she nodded, accepting the thanks without letting it change her stance. Respect, she knew now, was best received with balance. As the sun set, Amina stood by the window again, watching the light fade. The desks were empty, but the room felt full. She thought back to the day she had stood in the council hall and asked to be seen. That moment had not weakened her. It had strengthened everyone involved. She understood now that dignity could open doors that force never could. The term ended with the promise of summer ahead. The school would rest, and then it would begin again. Amina locked the door on the last day and slipped the key into her pocket. The path forward was not easy, but it was clear enough. And as she walked home under the evening sky, she felt certain that the quiet work of teaching, of standing firm with humility, had shaped more than a decision. It had shaped a community that remembered its heart. Summer did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, in longer evenings and lighter mornings, in the way the town breathed easier now that the school's future was no longer in doubt. Amina felt the change as she walked the familiar streets. People met her eyes more readily. They spoke to her not as someone asking for mercy, but as someone who had stood firm and been heard. Respect had a quiet sound to it, and she heard it everywhere. The school closed for a short break, but Amina did not stop working. She cleaned the classroom herself, opening the windows wide to let the air carry away the dust of a long year. She sorted books, repaired torn pages with careful tape, and labeled boxes for the coming term. Each task felt lighter now. She was not racing against a closing door anymore. She was preparing a place that would continue to grow. Parents began to stop by in the evenings, sometimes just to talk. One mother admitted she had learned to read alongside her daughter and now read signs in the market with pride. A father thanked Amina for not giving up when others had already accepted loss. These conversations stayed with her more than the official letter ever could. They were proof that change did not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it came with steady footsteps. Mr. Hadley also changed, though slowly. He visited the school one afternoon with a small team to discuss repairs. He listened more than he spoke. He asked Amina what the children needed, not what was cheapest. When she mentioned new shelves and better light, he nodded and made notes. There was no apology in his words, but there was consideration. That was enough. Amina did not need regret from him. She needed responsibility, and she saw it beginning to take root. As summer deepened, the school became a place of gathering, even without formal lessons. Children came to read under the shade of the trees. Older students helped younger ones with letters and numbers. Amina watched from the doorway sometimes, letting the learning happen without her voice guiding every step. It pleased her to see the school live beyond her control. That, she believed, was the true sign of success. Yet life did not smooth itself entirely. A letter arrived one morning from a regional office announcing new standards that all schools would soon be expected to meet. The requirements were stricter, the reporting heavier. Amina felt the old pressure return, pressing gently but firmly. She sat at her small table that night and read the letter again. This time, fear did not take hold. She had learned how to face challenges without shrinking. She called a meeting with the parents and volunteers. She explained the new expectations in simple terms. There was no panic in her voice, only clarity. Together, they made a plan. Some parents would help with record-keeping. Others would volunteer time for repairs and maintenance. The baker offered to sponsor notebooks. The locksmith promised to build shelves. What once would have been Amina's burden alone became shared work. One evening as she walked home, Amina passed the old council hall. The lights were on, and through the window she saw Mr. Hadley seated alone, papers spread before him. For a moment she considered walking past without a word. Then she stopped. She knocked lightly and stepped inside. Their conversation was brief and honest. She thanked him for standing by the school. He admitted that the experience had changed how he looked at his role. He spoke of balance, of learning when to pause and listen. They parted without ceremony, but something settled between them. Mutual respect, plain and unspoken. The children returned in the autumn with new energy. The classroom felt brighter with repaired windows and sturdier shelves. Amina welcomed them as she always had, but there was something new in her presence. She carried herself with a calm certainty that did not ask permission. The children felt it too. They worked with more confidence, asked deeper questions, and helped one another more readily. Newer, now reading fluently, began helping younger students. Sammy took responsibility for organizing materials. These were small roles, but they mattered. Amina encouraged them, reminding them that leadership was not about standing above others, but about lifting what needed lifting. Her lessons went beyond books. They were lessons in how to live with dignity. As the months passed, visitors came from nearby towns to see the school that had refused to disappear. They asked questions, took notes, and left thoughtful. Amina shared freely what had worked and what had not. She did not claim credit alone. She spoke of the town, the children, the shared effort. Pride, she had learned, could exist without ownership. One afternoon, during a quiet moment, Amina found the old drawing again, the sun with the crooked smile. She held it gently, thinking of the day she had placed it on the council table. That moment no longer felt sharp or risky. It felt necessary. She understood now that dignity was not something others granted. It was something you carried, even when asking to be seen. The year moved on, filled with ordinary challenges and steady progress. The school stood not because of one speech or one decision, but because a teacher had chosen to remain human in a room full of numbers. Because a town had remembered its responsibility. because children had been given space to grow. On a cool evening near the end of the term, Amina locked the school door and paused. The building no longer leaned as badly. The paint was still worn, but it held. She placed her hand on the door and felt a quiet satisfaction. The work was never finished. It did not need to be. It only needed to continue. As she walked home, the sky darkened gently above her. She thought of the path ahead, of future challenges that would surely come. But she also knew this. She had learned how to stand without hardening, how to speak without begging, and how to ask for worth without losing herself. That lesson would carry her forward wherever the road led next. Years later, people in the town would say that the school had changed them as much as it had changed the children. But on the morning Amina finally decided to step back and look at her own life, it felt like an ordinary day. The bell rang, the desks filled. The chalk dust floated in the same soft way it always had. Yet something inside her was settling, like a long-held breath finally released. She had grown older without noticing it much. Her hair showed more gray now, and her steps were slower, but her voice still carried the same calm strength. The children she taught in those difficult years had grown into young adults. Some worked in the town, some had moved away, but many still returned to visit. They greeted her with respect that was natural, not forced. They remembered how she had stood for them when standing was not easy. One afternoon, Nor returned. She was taller, confident, carrying a small bag of books under her arm. She had become a trainee teacher in a nearby town. When she stood in the doorway of the classroom, Amina felt a quiet joy that words could not hold. Nor spoke of lessons learned, of children who reminded her of herself. She said simply, "I wanted to be like you." Amina smiled, knowing that the greatest success of teaching was never written in reports. Sammy returned too, though in a different way. He had become skilled with his hands, working with tools and repairs. He volunteered to fix desks and doors when the school needed it. He spoke less than others, but his actions were steady. One evening, as he tightened a hinge, he said, "You taught me how to stay." Amina understood what he meant. Staying present. Staying kind. Staying responsible. The school itself stood stronger than before. It was no longer fragile in the eyes of the council or the town. It had become a place of reference, a quiet example of what could happen when care and patience guided decisions. Other towns had copied its model. Some had even asked Amina for advice. She gave it freely, always reminding them that no plan worked without listening. Mr. Hadley retired quietly. On his last day, he visited the school one final time. They walked through the room together, slowly. He thanked her again, not as an official, but as a man who had learned something important too late and just in time. "You reminded me why numbers need faces," he said. Amina nodded. She did not correct him or soften his words. She accepted them as they were. As time passed, Amina felt a new question forming inside her. It was not about saving the school anymore. It was about who she was beyond that fight. She had given so much of herself to holding the line that she had rarely asked what she wanted next. The thought did not frighten her. It felt honest. She began to train younger teachers, guiding them through challenges with the same steady patience she had shown her students. She taught them how to speak clearly, how to listen fully, and how to ask for respect without losing themselves. She told them stories, not of victory, but of balance, of standing firm without becoming hard. One evening after a long day, Amina sat alone in the classroom. The sun dipped low, casting golden lines across the desks. She thought back to the moment in the council hall, the day she had stepped forward without armor and asked to be seen. That moment had changed her life, not because it saved the school, but because it changed how she saw herself. She understood now that worth was not something given by approval or taken away by rejection. It was something lived, day by day, through choices made with honesty. Pride did not mean silence, strength did not mean distance, and asking to be recognized did not mean surrender. When the time came for Amina to retire, the town gathered quietly at the school. There were no grand speeches, just stories, shared smiles, and grateful looks. The children presented her with a simple book filled with notes and drawings from generations of students. On the first page, someone had drawn a sun with a crooked smile. Amina laughed softly when she saw it. Some things, she realized, circled back for a reason. She locked the school door one last time as its head teacher, placing the key into the hands of someone she trusted. As she walked away, she did not feel loss. She felt completion. The work would continue. The dignity she had protected would live on in others. And as she walked through the town that had once hesitated to listen, she knew this truth with calm certainty. When a person stands with quiet courage and asks to be seen without lowering themselves, They do more than change an outcome. They change the way worth itself is understood. The school still stands. The children still learn. And Amina's story, though simple, remains, not as a tale of pride alone, but as proof that dignity, when spoken softly and lived honestly, has the power to reshape lives.